The studio lights were bright, the audience tense, and the cameras rolling live. It was a prime-time debate that had already drawn millions of viewers. At center stage sat Jasmine Crockett, calm and prepared, while across from her Stephen Miller leaned forward, his jaw tight, ready to dominate the conversation. The moderator barely finished the opening question before Miller jumped in, slicing across Jasmine's opening words. His voice rose sharp and insistent, determined to silence her before she could even begin. The crowd murmured, sensing the clash to come. Jasmine didn't flinch. She placed her hands on the desk, her eyes fixed on him, a faint smile tugging at her lips. She let him speak, louder, faster, desperate to cut her down. What Miller didn't realize was that every interruption was only building her case stronger. The tension in the air felt like static before a storm. The audience leaned in, waiting to see if Jasmine would fold under the pressure or if her moment was still ahead. Miller kept charging forward, his voice booming over the moderator and drowning out Jasmine's attempt to respond. For the second time in less than 2 minutes, he cut her off, waving his hands dramatically as though sheer volume would win the debate. The moderator raised a hand to restore order, but Miller plowed ahead, insisting that Jasmine's perspective was misguided and irrelevant. The crowd stirred, some shaking their heads at his interruptions, others whispering in anticipation of what Jasmine might do next. Jasmine leaned back in her chair, calm and collected, her expression unreadable. Instead of rushing to fight for airtime, she let Miller talk himself into a frenzy. The cameras zoomed in on her, capturing her composed silence, an image that stood in stark contrast to Miller's agitation. When he finally paused for breath, Jasmine adjusted her microphone and tilted her head slightly. The audience grew quiet, sensing she was about to answer in a way that could shift the entire energy of the room. The moderator tried once more to steer the debate, but before the next question could even leave his lips, Miller lunged in for a third interruption. His voice carried an edge of impatience now, as though he couldn't allow Jasmine a single uninterrupted sentence. "See, this is exactly the problem," Miller shouted, stabbing the air with his finger. "Every time we try to have a serious conversation, she twists the facts. I won't let her mislead this audience tonight." The audience reacted with a mix of gasps and groans. Some even booed at his blatant attempt to dominate. Jasmine, still poised, rested her chin lightly against her hand. She didn't snap back, didn't raise her voice. Instead, she watched him with the calm stare of someone who already knew the outcome. Her patience was starting to look less like silence and more like strategy. She let the noise settle, then leaned forward toward the microphone. Her lips parted, finally ready to speak, but once again Miller leaned in, his voice crashing over hers before a single word could land. That was interruption number 4. The tension was climbing, and the audience could feel it. Jasmine's breaking point hadn't come yet, but when it did, it would be explosive. By the 4th interruption, the audience was visibly restless. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, and even the moderator's patience was wearing thin. Miller's tone grew sharper, more aggressive. He wagged a finger in Jasmine's direction, his words overlapping hers again. "You're dodging the real issues, and everyone can see it. Don't try to smooth talk your way out of this." The cameras cut to Jasmine, who sat motionless, almost amused. Her eyes flickered toward the audience, as though silently asking them, "Are you seeing this too?" When she finally leaned toward her microphone, her voice came out low and steady, but before a full sentence could form, Miller barged in yet again, this time for the 5th time. The moderator raised his voice, "Mr. Miller, please let Representative Crockett finish." But Miller only smirked, refusing to back down, as if the entire stage belonged to him. What he didn't realize was that each rude interruption wasn't weakening Jasmine, it was feeding her next move. The audience sat forward, waiting for the inevitable moment when she would strike back. The 5th interruption came like clockwork. Miller leaned across the table, cutting Jasmine off mid-word, his voice rising to nearly a shout. "See? This is exactly what I'm talking about, empty rhetoric with no real answers," he barked, his hands slamming against the desk for emphasis. The audience erupted in a mix of boos and laughter. Even those who disagreed with Jasmine were growing tired of Miller's relentless steamrolling. Jasmine took a slow sip of water, her eyes never leaving him. Her calmness contrasted so sharply with his outburst that the cameras lingered on her face, capturing the faint smirk forming at the corner of her mouth. Finally, she adjusted her microphone and said softly, "Are you finished?" The crowd chuckled, and a wave of applause rippled through the studio. Miller flushed, his jaw tightening. Yet before Jasmine could follow through with her point, he pounced again, the sixth interruption, talking over her with the same force, as if he couldn't allow her even a moment of control. The audience groaned this time, fed up with his antics. They knew the seventh attempt to silence her wouldn't go his way. The tension snapped like a wire when Miller launched into his sixth interruption. He raised his voice to dominate the stage, jabbing his finger at Jasmine as if scolding her. "You've had enough time. The people don't want speeches, they want facts, and you don't have any," he thundered, drowning out both Jasmine and the moderator. The audience groaned louder this time. Some even shouted, "Let her talk." The frustration in the room was unmistakable. Jasmine, however, sat perfectly still. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't fight for the mic. She simply folded her hands, her posture straight, her gaze locked on Miller with an expression that said, "Go ahead, finish digging your own hole." Then, as Miller paused for breath, the moderator leaned in. "Mr. Miller, that's 6 times you've interrupted. Representative Crockett deserves the floor." The audience applauded in agreement, and Jasmine finally leaned forward. She tapped her microphone lightly, her calm presence commanding attention. Everyone knew what was coming, the seventh moment, the one Miller wouldn't be able to talk his way out of. The studio fell into a rare silence. Miller sat back in his chair, smirking as if he had already won, convinced Jasmine had nothing left to say. But Jasmine leaned into her microphone, her voice calm, clear, and unshakable. "Stephen," she began slowly, "you've interrupted me 6 times tonight. That tells me 2 things. 1, you're afraid of what I'm about to say, and 2, you think the louder voice wins." The audience erupted in applause, some even standing. Miller's smirk faltered, but he quickly leaned forward, ready to jump in again. This time Jasmine didn't let him. She raised her hand and continued, her voice cutting through the noise. "You've had your chance to shout. Now it's my turn to show the difference between noise and substance." The crowd roared. Cameras zoomed in on Miller's face, his confidence cracking, his eyes darting nervously as the weight of her words landed. And then came her 7th comeback, a pointed, devastating line aimed directly at Miller's entire argument. "You call my answers empty, but the only thing empty here tonight is your respect for this debate, and the truth." The studio exploded. Applause thundered, drowning out even Miller's attempt to sputter back. For the first time all evening, he sat in stunned silence. The audience leapt to their feet, clapping and cheering so loud that the moderator had to pause. Miller's face flushed red, his jaw tight as he fumbled with his notes, clearly rattled. Jasmine didn't even look at him. She simply sat back, composed, letting the crowd's reaction speak louder than anything she could add. The cameras caught her calm smile, a sharp contrast to Miller's visible frustration. When the noise finally quieted, Miller tried to claw back control. He leaned forward, raising his voice again, desperate to reassert dominance. "Don't be fooled by her sound bites. She's dodging the facts, and you people are clapping because she's clever, not because she's right." But the more he spoke, the worse it looked. His words dripped with anger, while Jasmine radiated confidence. The audience booed him now, a clear sign that the momentum of the debate had shifted. The moderator turned back to Jasmine. "Representative Crockett, please continue." She leaned forward again, her tone calm but sharp. "The truth doesn't need shouting to be heard. And the more you interrupt me, the clearer it becomes that you're afraid of it." The crowd erupted again, and this time, Miller had no comeback. He stared down at his desk, silent, as Jasmine's words echoed across the room. Miller sat rigid, his jaw tight, but the silence burned him more than any attack. He couldn't stand the humiliation. So, against the clear frustration of the audience, he made one last desperate attempt. Slamming his palm on the desk, he leaned toward the microphone and snapped, "Don't mistake applause for proof. You think clever lines make you right, Jasmine? You fooled them, but you won't fool me." The audience groaned loudly. Some even shouted, "Sit down." His outburst sounded less like confidence and more like desperation. Jasmine didn't flinch. She simply turned her head, fixing him with a measured stare that cut sharper than any raised voice could. Then, in a voice cool and steady, she delivered her final blow. "Stephen, I don't need to fool you. The only person you fooled tonight is yourself, into thinking that interruptions and noise are stronger than reason. But everyone watching knows better now." The words landed like a hammer. The audience erupted, standing and clapping, their cheers echoing through the studio. Cameras zoomed in on Miller's face, red, tight-lipped, and utterly defeated. For the first time all night, Stephen Miller said nothing. Jasmine Crockett had ended it. The debate was effectively over, even though the clock still had minutes left. Miller sat stiff in his chair, flipping his papers in silence, but it was clear, he had no recovery. Every camera in the studio was fixed on Jasmine, who had just stolen the night. The moderator, sensing the shift, moved on to the next topic, but the audience wasn't done. They broke into applause again, louder than before, as Jasmine calmly adjusted her microphone and sat back with a composed smile. Within minutes of the broadcast ending, clips of her seventh comeback flooded social media. The phrase, "The only person you fooled tonight is yourself," was plastered across timelines, replayed again and again, millions of views piling up in real time. Commentators called it a masterclass in patience and precision. Headlines flashed across news sites, "Crockett destroys Miller with just one line." Meanwhile, Miller's interruptions were cut into a compilation, framed not as strength, but as proof of weakness. His strategy had backfired completely, leaving his reputation bruised. Jasmine, on the other hand, had gone viral once again, not by shouting, not by overpowering, but by staying calm and letting Miller unravel himself. Her quiet strength had become the loudest message of the night. By the next morning, the debate had already cemented itself as one of the most replayed political showdowns of the year. Clips of Jasmine's takedown spread like wildfire, shared on late-night shows, reaction channels, and political podcasts. Commentators couldn't stop replaying the moment. On one network, a panelist said, "It wasn't just a line, it was a surgical strike." Crockett waited, let Miller exhaust himself, and then dismantled him in front of millions. Meanwhile, Miller's team scrambled to spin the narrative. His spokespeople tried to claim he had been passionate and forceful, but the internet had already decided, he had been outclassed and humiliated. Memes of his red-faced interruptions circulated non-stop, paired with Jasmine's calm expression and sharp words. Even neutral outlets admitted the truth, Miller had lost his cool, while Jasmine had owned the stage. Jasmine herself didn't gloat. In an interview the next morning, she simply said, "I wasn't there to win an argument. I was there to stand firm." If someone thinks shouting is strength, they'll eventually learn that calm facts are louder. The comment only added to her momentum, painting her as not just a fighter, but a voice of composure in chaos. The fallout only grew stronger as the week unfolded. Jasmine's comeback was clipped into short videos on every platform, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, racking up millions of views within days. Hashtags like #CrockettComeback and #7thLine trended worldwide. Political analysts called it a turning point moment. Even some of Miller's usual allies admitted off-camera that his approach had backfired spectacularly. One conservative host sighed on air, "He didn't debate her, he drowned himself out." Meanwhile, Jasmine was invited onto multiple shows. She accepted one primetime interview where the host asked her if she had prepared that line. She smiled and replied, "No. I just listened. When someone interrupts you 6 times, they're not debating you, they're proving you right. All I had to do was point it out. The audience applauded mid-interview, and the clip went viral yet again. Miller, on the other hand, cancelled appearances. His silence only fueled the narrative that he had been thoroughly defeated. Commentators joked, he spoke over her 6 times and still managed to say nothing. Jasmine's rise was undeniable, calm, sharp, and unforgettable. Miller's reputation? Shaken to the core. Weeks later, the debate was still being talked about. Jasmine's 7th comeback had become a defining political highlight, replayed in documentaries, news specials, and even late-night comedy skits. Her calm stare, her perfectly timed words, and Miller's stunned silence had etched themselves into political history. Commentators began calling it the Crockett method, a strategy of patience, composure, and precision. Young politicians cited her as an example of how to win without shouting. Even rival pundits admitted, grudgingly, that she had mastered the art of timing. For Miller, the night became a cautionary tale. His interruptions were remembered not as strength, but as arrogance, his outbursts reduced to memes and punchlines. Every time he appeared in the weeks after, audiences couldn't help but remember the moment Jasmine dismantled him with a single sentence. Jasmine, meanwhile, used the momentum wisely. She didn't boast, didn't dwell, she let the public keep replaying the clip while she moved on to pressing issues. Her composure after victory only elevated her further. In the end, one debate, one line, and one calm voice outshined 6 interruptions and a storm of noise. And millions agreed. Stephen Miller tried to silence Jasmine Crockett 6 times, but her 7th comeback didn't just silence him. It destroyed him. As time passed, the moment only grew larger than the debate itself. It became a cultural flashpoint. Clips of Jasmine's response were used in classrooms, leadership seminars, and motivational talks about patience under pressure. The phrase, "The only person you fooled tonight is yourself," was quoted in editorials, printed on t-shirts, and even turned into trending audio on TikTok. Political strategists analyzed the showdown, noting how Jasmine didn't fight fire with fire but instead let Miller burn himself out. Her calm confidence became a model for others, a reminder that composure could be the sharpest weapon in politics. Meanwhile, Miller's credibility suffered. Every time he appeared on TV, hosts subtly reminded viewers of the night he was Crocketted. Audiences laughed, and his attempts to reclaim control of the narrative only made things worse. Jasmine, however, stayed focused on her work. She didn't gloat, didn't feed the drama. By refusing to linger on Miller's collapse, she elevated herself above the spectacle, making it clear that while he fought for attention, she fought for results. And that was why the story lasted. Because in a world of noise, Jasmine Crockett proved one undeniable truth: sometimes silence, patience, and a perfectly timed comeback can echo louder than any shout. Years later, that debate night was still remembered, not as just another political argument, but as the evening Jasmine Crockett redefined the stage. Her composure, her timing, and that unforgettable 7th line became a case study in how patience and clarity could dismantle arrogance. Documentaries replayed the moment with dramatic music, narrators calling it the line that ended the shouting match. Universities showed it in courses on public speaking and debate. Even political rivals referenced it, grudgingly admitting that it was one of the most devastating comebacks ever delivered live on air. Stephen Miller, meanwhile, never fully escaped the shadow of that night. Every attempt at reclaiming authority was met with reminders of the moment he had been silenced. His name became tied to the cautionary lesson of what happens when bluster meets precision. For Jasmine Crockett, however, it became a launch pad. Her reputation soared, not just as a sharp debater, but as a leader who knew when to wait and when to strike. The clip lived on, replayed millions of times across generations, an enduring symbol of restraint turned into power. And so the legacy stood clear. Miller tried to cut her off 6 times, but Jasmine's 7th comeback didn't just win the night, it wrote itself into history.